goes without saying that Donald Trump's cabinet picks are essentially the opposite of what liberals would hope for. Many of them are former industry heads who've now been placed in charge of the very departments that regulate those industries. Tillerson for State, who has a close relationship with Russia and has circumvented the State Department while head of Exxon. Puzder for Labor, who's the head of CKE Restaurants and opposes raising the minimum wage, and who Trump praises for his opposition to regulations. You know, the rules that protect workers, the public, and the environment. Chow for Transportation, whose primary qualifications seem to be marriage to Mitch McConnell and being a former Labor Secretary under W. While Secretary of Labor, she cut OSHA protections, enforcement budgets, raised the threshold for time and a half pay by $10,000, then made it harder for people above that threshold to get that pay. Linda McMahon, the former head of the WWE, will be overseeing small businesses, but appears primarily interested in cutting corporate taxes and also rolling back regulations. Pruitt for EPA, a man who, as Oklahoma Attorney General, collaborated with Devon Energy, one of Oklahoma's oil and gas companies, to draft letters and legislation that benefit said energy companies, and sued the Department of Interior for adding animals to the endangered list. Nunchin, a former Goldman Sachs executive for Treasury Secretary. You may remember Goldman Sachs from the financial crises a while back. They're someone Investopedia referred to as, quote, an emblem of everything diabolical about high finance, end quote. Carson for Housing and Urban Development, even though he originally declined the Health and Human Services seat, citing lack of experience. So a surgeon who doesn't have enough experience for the health department is qualified for HUD? Rick Perry, who wanted to dismantle the Department of Energy, except he forgot that that was one of the three he was told he wanted to destroy after Commerce and Education, is now going to be the head of energy, replacing a nuclear physicist. Then there's Pompeo with the CIA, who's a big advocate of bulk collection of call information. That means not just calls between terrorists and criminals, but between you and your lawyer, or your doctor, or your girlfriend. Trump has established one of the wealthiest cabinets in history. He claimed he would drain the swamp, and instead he filled it with snakes, gators, and piranha. So tell me, Republicans, people who voted for Trump, was that what you voted for? Did you vote for environmental ruin? Because that's probably what you're going to get. Because protecting the water we drink and the air we breathe costs money, and that cuts into profits. Did you vote for shittier work environments? Because that's probably what you're going to get. Because protecting workers, the people who buy their products, and the planet we live on, cuts into profits. The Republicans can't agree on a replacement for Obamacare, but they know it has to go. So 9 million people, including 3 million people in red states, are expected to lose their health subsidies. Did you vote to lose your health coverage? Because that's what you're likely to get. I know he promised to make America great again, registered trademark, and he promised to build a wall and get rid of those brown people and get a list of all those Muslims, and maybe he even will. But I sort of doubt it, because the delightful group that Stephen King refers to as plunder monkeys are there to make money and to help their pals make money and their industries make money, and they don't give a shit about you. Because what's become clear since the middle of the 20th century is that when the Republicans are in charge, real people suffer. You suffer. Was that what you voted for, Trump supporter? Because that's what you're going to get.
The sleep of reason brings forth monsters.
I'm a whiner, and I keep whining and whining until I win.
Maybe somebody will rise up.
We must not confuse dissent with disloyalty.
Welcome to Swing State, an aggressive, progressive, critical, and political podcast from the middle of the Midwest. I'm Lewayne.
I'm AJ. This is episode 2.
So the Electoral College actually voted, and it appears that they voted for Trump. There were a handful of faithless electors. Most of them didn't do what we hoped they do, which was ensure that Trump didn't become president. And I think, if anything, it pretty much shows us the ineffectiveness of the Electoral College when its one ultimate function it failed to do.
When Alexander Hamilton was writing about this in the Federalist Papers, he basically came up with two specific things that the Electoral College was designed to do. I forget which number this was. I think it was in the 60s somewhere. The notion of the Electoral College was that it could prevent a foreign despot who managed to wriggle his way into office. That could be stopped by the Electoral College. The second thing was that, loosely paraphrased, what he said is the Electoral College was designed to stop someone who had mastered the arts of petty popularity. In other words, a populist candidate who clearly has no idea what he's doing. He's merely manipulating the masses when he doesn't, in fact, have any plans at all to do anything to help them, and doesn't even, in our case, appear to understand the gravity of what he was doing. I think one of the most amazing stories that came out of the Trump transition so far, Barack Obama is going to have to spend an inordinate amount of time coaching this individual on how to actually be president of the United States.
Let's be honest. Even you guys on the right had to have looked at Trump and realized he doesn't know what the hell actually is involved with being the president. He seems unclear what his role is, what his power is, and has basically coasted in on proclamations about stuff he doesn't actually have anything to do with.
Yeah, like, for example, jailing or prosecuting Hillary Clinton. What mechanism is in place for the President of the United States to decide that an individual needs to be investigated for supposed crimes that have already been cleared by numerous different agencies? And if you're in the audience listening to Trump at one of his rallies and you hear that we're going to lock her up or jail her, I can't believe that nobody bothered to ask, well, how are we going to do that? Or how are we going to make Mexico pay for a wall that we're going to build? Or how are we going to get $1 trillion infrastructure package passed with a Republican House and a Republican Congress, who is the sole impediment to us doing that now?
Well, and here's the other thing, particularly when it comes to the investigating and or jailing Hillary. How the hell does it not occur to you that if he can say that about her, he can say it about you? And if you think he can enforce it about her, which he can't unless he becomes the fascist everybody thinks he already is, then he can do it to you. And I don't know why that doesn't chill the shit out of you. I really, really don't. Because, well, I do know. It's because you don't know. Because you don't know that he can't do that. Or you don't care. I'm not sure which it is.
There's a point there, if I can just pick it up real quick. The fact that Trump voters are along for the ride with the xenophobia, particularly as it pertains to Muslims and Latinos and other immigrant groups to this country, why the idea of a Muslim registry, which is, by the way, still out there as a concept. It has not gone away. Several of his cabinet picks are all on board. How does that not chill you to your core as a quote-unquote patriotic American? I think we're starting to lose the definition of patriotism in this country, or freedom even. It's like these words have been thrown around and bandied about so much that they have lost all meaning. Because if you claim to be a patriot for a registry or for a ban on a religious group, which is so anti-constitutional it's nauseating, how do you then turn around and consider yourself a patriotic American?
Well, I can tell you how. It's because words like patriotism and freedom and so forth have been co-opted in an almost Orwellian way. The people who claim to be patriotic, the people who claim to love freedom, are the ones who seem the most excited about impinging on other people's freedom and disqualifying anyone else's behavior as unpatriotic. If you listen to our previous show, we closed with what has kind of become our mantra: organize, mobilize, protest, vote. And there are people who view that now as unpatriotic because we protest, because we don't want somebody like Trump in charge, because we're telling people we don't want somebody like Trump in charge. We're not being un-American. We are being literally patriotic.
And technically correct. If you just examine all of Donald Trump's policies and you line them up next to basically any tin pot dictatorship around the world, historically, whatever, you'll find that there are more than a few passing similarities in both approach and substance.
Here's the difference. I know if any of you on the right are listening to us, you're thinking, but Obama, or but Hillary, and what they were going to do. Except they never did, and they never said they were going to do it. They never said, we're coming for your guns. You thought they were. They didn't do a damn thing.
By the way, the clock is ticking on that claim for the Obama administration, and I mean, Hillary Clinton will never get her shot at it, but we've been hearing for 8 years that Obama's coming for the guns, he's coming for the guns. Well, time is running out. What stopped him? Could it maybe be, perhaps, that he never actually intended to begin with?
And never gave any indication he was going to.
And never attempted to do anything about it.
By contrast, and the reason we're concerned about Trump is, he's actually said he wants to jail Hillary, he wants to register Muslims, he wants to round up all the aliens, he wants to build a wall. These are things he wanted to do, and you voted for him for wanting to do. That's why we protest. Because we have a legitimate concern about how he is going to run the government based on what he specifically has said.
And then there's another segment of his, I guess I'd call it a cult, because it seems like that's the operating method here in old Trump land, is to just believe what the supreme leader tells you. But then also at the same time, this is something going back to last week's show as well, he's a straight shooter who just says what he means and tells it like it is. But yet when he backpedals on any of these policies, or we find out, you know what, actually we really weren't going to lock up Hillary Clinton. It was all just kind of a gag. You know, like he's starting to say at these thank you masturbation rallies he's going around doing, where he has the audience fillet him because he can't be bothered to do his intelligence briefing, so he's got to go do something else that makes him feel good, and rallies make him feel good. But the people who are at these rallies and are screaming and chanting, what must they be thinking about all of these promises that he's not going to keep or that he's not going to do? And then throw onto that, if he starts to actually cut Medicare and Medicaid, Social Security, health care, they repeal Obamacare and replace it, which we haven't seen the replacement. It's so frustrating to live in a state where you can have so much cognitive dissonance going on. People either oblivious to it or worse than just being oblivious. Ignorance is not a crime, as Richard Dawkins says. People are usually not ignorant on purpose. But when you don't have any standards for your presidential candidate, soon to be now officially the President of the United States, when you don't have any standards for truth or veracity or consistency, you don't care if he lies to you, you don't care if he lies at rallies, you don't care if he backpedals on all of his policies, where does that leave us philosophically, morally, and even in just a sense of pure leadership? If the leader can't be trusted to shoot you straight, what are we going to do?
If you need any further evidence that Trump's followers aren't paying attention and don't know what's going on, a survey conducted by the research company Qualtrics showed that 52% of Republican voters think that Donald Trump won the popular vote in November's general election, despite Hillary kicking his ass by almost 3 million votes. Now, Qualtrics' question was phrased, and this is according to Business Insider. This is not a particularly liberal source.
That is not the Daily Kos for anyone who's listening.
No. The Qualtrics question was phrased, quote, in last month's election, Donald Trump won the majority of votes in the Electoral College. Who do you think won the most popular votes? They found that education, surprise, played a huge role in the likelihood of respondents saying he won the popular vote. 60% of Republicans with high school diplomas said he won, compared to just 37% of college-educated Republicans.
It's hard not to draw a line between what Lewayne just read to you and policy, in a way, because which party is the party that is trying to save and strengthen education? Which is the party that's going to try and voucherize education so that we can have more religious schools?
Exactly. When I first saw that, I had to actually think about it for a little bit, because there are a couple of different reasons that people would respond that Trump won the popular vote. One of them is that they simply don't know.
Very possible.
And that may be. Maybe all they know about is that the Electoral College said Trump won. Okay? It may be that simple. Or, and this is the one that concerns me more, they actually believe the bullshit he spouted about the millions of illegal voters.
Never retracted, by the way. I want to insert this for the record. He has never retracted that claim to my knowledge.
Has he ever retracted any claim?
No. No, he hasn't.
Here's the thing, though, about that. There's still no evidence. You know what there is evidence of? There's evidence that someone in Iowa who is a Trump voter voted twice. That's the closest thing we have to voter fraud. Now, what you may be hearing, particularly if you're on the right, and you're already mad at me because of the stuff I'm saying, is that I'm saying you're stupid. I'm not. Maybe you're too busy. Maybe you're not paying attention. Whatever. The fact remains, the guy that you voted for is literally lying to you. And a bunch of you have believed it. He's literally lying to you. Not in the all politicians sort of lie and hedge their bets. He literally said something was factually true that was not, for which there is no evidence, and for which he has never been corrected, nor has he retracted the statement. And he did that throughout his campaign.
And that single lie about the 3 million people voting illegally is not even the thing that really bothers us. The fact that the president-elect can get away with telling a brazen lie and not have instantly a mountain of criticism haunt him, people just following him around in the street saying, hey, wait a minute, what about the 3 million? Hey, wait a minute, what about the 3 million? You just lied to us. He's lying to you on a whole other level, too, which is if you remember the hashtag drain the swamp mantra that's been going on for a year now. You know, first he wasn't going to take the donations, then when it hit the general election, suddenly he was. Well, this act is continuing, this little tap dance is continuing into the White House with his cabinet selections. We were promised a new day in Washington. If you were a Trump voter, if there is one thing that I can connect with you on at a very deep level, it's that sense that we really do need to remove lifetime politicians, banksters, oil executives, corporate executives. We need to get these people out of the system. We do need to drain the swamp because it is basically just becoming this incestuous merry-go-round where you leave, you lobby, you come back, you run again, you run for a different position, you're never out because you're in the circle. You're in the special aristocratic circle. You can do what you like. But now he is filling his cabinet with all of the people you put him in power to avoid like the plague.
And like AJ said, here's the thing that we can't agree on. Politics needs to be changed. We both agree on that. The difference is you thought Trump was going to be that change. I didn't have any illusions about what Hillary was going to be.
None whatsoever.
She would not have been my choice, but my alternative was Trump. And Trump had made it very clear to me, even if he hadn't made it clear to you, that he doesn't give a shit about not only us personally, but the nation as a whole. His relationship with Russia should frighten the hell out of you.
His basic way of conducting business should frighten the hell out of you. Why would this not raise at least a suspicion for you that this guy is not on the level? And if he's not on the level, why would you want him as president? What do you think? You're the luckiest person in Las Vegas, that everybody else he's conned, they were the suckers, but once it's my turn to be the one who he's going to thank and help because of all the work that you've put in for his campaign. Guys, I'm sorry, but you are in for a very, very rough road, and the only way out now is to wake up and see what is happening to you. And it starts by looking at his cabinet picks. Just look into who these people are.
Obviously, in the Broadside at the opening of the episode, I discussed several of his cabinet picks and why these people are bad, not only for me, but for you. But we want to focus a little bit on one in particular, which is his pick for state.
Rex Tillerson, CEO of ExxonMobil, one of the largest corporations on Earth.
As you may imagine, not exactly a great friend of the environment. But rather than disparage Mr. Tillerson, we'll let him go ahead and speak for himself.
So I'm not disputing that increasing CO2 emissions in the atmosphere is going to have an impact. It'll have a warming impact. The how large it is what is very hard for anyone to predict. And depending on how large it is, then projects how dire the consequences are. As we have looked at the most recent studies coming out in the IPCC reports, which I've seen the drafts, and I can't say too much because they're not out yet. But when you predict things like sea level rise, you get numbers all over the map. If you take what I would call a reasonable scientific approach to that, we believe those consequences are manageable. They do require us to begin to exert or spend more policy effort on adaptation. What do you want to do if we think the future has sea level rising 4 inches, 6 inches? Where are the impacted areas, and what do you want to do to adapt to that? And as human beings, as a species, that's why we're all still here. We have spent our entire existence adapting. Okay, so we will adapt to this. Changes to weather patterns that move crop production areas around, we'll adapt to that. It's an engineering problem, and it has engineering solutions. And so I don't, the fear factor that people want to throw out there to say we just have to stop this, I do not accept.
There you have it. Rex Tillerson, potentially our next Secretary of State, answering a question on climate change. His final solution is engineering problems / will adapt. If you're familiar with the word adapt or adaptation in an evolutionary context, that almost seems appropriate here, because he seems to be describing a kind of world where he will get to continue and his business will get to continue doing whatever they like because they're a powerful corporation. And the rest of us will just adapt to it. We'll adapt.
Presumably that means we'll evolve to breathe CO2 and potentially live underwater?
Potentially. We may, in fact, find Kevin Costner floating by in a raft one of these days pretty soon. And
I really hope that somebody's actually going to get the Waterworld reference, because otherwise nobody knows what the hell you're talking about.
Everybody knows what I'm talking about. Don't be foolish. Everybody knows that movie. It's the greatest movie of all time. And we're laughing, we're joking, we're having fun. But guys, if you're listening at home and you're even moderately acquainted with the climate change issue as it stands today and what it represents and how serious it is for our country and for the planet, let me just break it down for you in some basic numbers. Right now, human beings, the scientific community has told us, we have contributed approximately 0.6 to 0.8 degrees Celsius worth of warming to the oceans, and as a result, everything else. We've contributed that already. Recently, hundreds of nations convened in Paris for a climate summit where the frankly weak and not completely effective agreement that was finally reached. It was a very good first step, but it was an imperfect agreement. We are going to try as a global community to prevent the temperatures from rising 2 degrees Celsius. Why 2 degrees Celsius? Why don't we just adapt, as Mr. Tillerson says? Why don't we just adapt to it? It's fine, right? We can just burn more stuff and, drill in the Arctic, and, Vladimir Putin can have his sort of wish list at the State Department of where we want to drill and what's legal, what we can export, what pipelines we can build. We'll just adapt to it. Well, the reason we don't adapt to it is because there's no adapting to 3 to 4 degrees Celsius of warming. What that will cause is every coastal city, pretty much in the world, will be inundated with water. That doesn't even take into account all of the effects along the way in particularly vulnerable regions like lowland regions, I'm thinking of the Netherlands, parts of the United States, or the heat waves and such, which will take over the Middle East, the forest fires in the western United States. None of this stuff even includes that. That's just, if we get up to 4 degrees, we were talking about our coastal infrastructure is gone. What adaptation, what is he talking about will adapt to that? There won't be a country left to adapt if we allow this to happen.
Because here's the thing. When you're talking about the lowland areas, as you were, flooding, imagine Katrina all the way around the United States. Not just in one isolated area, but literally the entire surrounding of the United States. The surrounding edges of Europe, Asia, Africa, all of it, underwater. How do we adapt? Because you saw how well that worked in Louisiana.
And just going off of that, let's talk about coastal cities. Where are we talking about? New York City, ring a bell? Boston, Massachusetts, ring a bell? Miami, Florida?
It's not just Miami. It's mostly Florida. America's dong just disappears, okay?
How about in China? Beijing, Shanghai, Hong Kong? We're talking tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people combined. In fact, if you look geographically across the world, most people are clustered in coastal cities in places like that. What Mr. Tillerson is saying, what his conclusion is, his reasoned conclusion, I'm sure based on sound science brought to you by ExxonMobil, is that we will adapt and we will engineer our way out of the biggest global catastrophe we could imagine. It is an end time scenario that we're talking about. All forms of government erased almost overnight if this happens.
In one respect, he's right. The solution is an engineering solution, but it's not the one he thinks it is. The engineering solution is to engineer methods of drawing energy that don't require fossil fuels and that don't require us to increase the carbon output and don't require us to get involved in wars in the Middle East over shit we don't care about because that's where the oil is. The engineering solution is to engineer alternative methods of power. The thing I've always wondered whenever I hear people talking about it's not a big deal or we don't need to do that is, what exactly is the harm in acting as if global climate change is a reality? The worst thing that happens is we improve our environment.
If you guys want a practical working example, go look in the newspaper the other day and just look at the pictures of Beijing, China, and what it looks like on a bad day in the winter. Part of that is geographic. They have a lot of coal burning to the west of Beijing, so it's not like it's just their cars, but it is their cars. And that's the thing that really irritates me about this particular conversation about climate change as it pertains to the oil industry, is all of a sudden we find out that these conservative Republicans are all about government welfare and subsidies for oil companies. They're all about entitlement and nanny stating to make sure that the oil companies can rip away your land to build pipelines when they want to make sure that the police come out to beat down the Native Americans if they start to get too loud and protest. We have a terrible entitlement program with the fossil fuel sector, who also happens to be one of the largest financial backers of Washington politicians and lobbyists in the entire world. So Donald Trump's draining the swamp by putting in one of the richest people probably on the planet, one of the richest, most profitable corporations on the planet. We're going to put him in the State Department, and then we're going to continue on persisting with policies that we now know we absolutely cannot continue on with if we want to survive as a species. This is how serious it is. I mean, this sounds apocalyptic, but it's just the science. It's just physics and chemistry at the end of the day. ExxonMobil wants to lobby for Arctic drilling. They want to lobby for additional drilling in Russia. I'm sure they've got interests all over the planet that they want to continue exploring and looking for oil. But at the end of the day, we literally have already discovered more oil reserves than we can burn and survive as it is. We really don't need to look for any more, unless, of course, your aim is to increase the quarterly profits of a certain company who's involved in the discovery and the politicians who are bribed to allow it to happen.
The thing that's most frequently summed up in a meme, we'll have to see if I can do it audibly. When something like, I don't know, the Exxon Valdez cracks open and spills oil everywhere, there's a massive cleanup. When the solar panels break, they don't flood everything with sunlight and destroy everything. When a wind turbine stops functioning,
it just kind of sits there, doesn't it?
We can continue doing the things that we do to power our houses and our cars and our computers and the microphones we're using for this. We can keep digging coal. We can keep digging for oil. We can keep digging for gas. Or we can use the stuff that hangs around in plain sight and not have to risk our world and our environment to do it.
This is the entitlement mentality we're talking about. These folks feel entitled to continue making profits for the rest of time because in exactly the way they've been doing, because that's the way they've always been doing it. Even though we know that oil on its best day is a terrible resource if you have any alternative. Why? Because it's flammable, for one. Any pipeline it is carried through can break. Any train it's on can explode. Any truck that it's being transported in can tip over and catch fire. If you just use it in your car and burn it, it creates a carcinogen, which is in the atmosphere, which isn't too good for your lungs. It's related to things like asthma and cancer. Would anyone like to step up and maybe explain what the dangers of solar power are, or wind power?
I'd actually be kind of curious about that.
Sunburn?
The sun that's just it. The worst argument I could think of in opposition to something like wind power is the physical existence of the turbines.
Considering that they're offshore, or usually in kind of remote parts of the state, the idea of one of them falling over and smushing somebody, well, I mean, tragic as that may be, it's nothing compared to what happened with the BP spill in New Orleans. So what do we do if we want to fight back against the oil companies? Here in our state, we get organized, we get mobilized, and we start to push through a clean energy agenda at the state level. That's what we need to do. Are we going to face opposition? Of course we are. It's going to be a monsoon of opposition because the oil companies, they will fund scientists, they will fund talking heads, they will fund anybody that they can. The same way the tobacco companies fund scientists and talking heads to try and convince you that smoking's not bad for you. It's the same game, ladies and gentlemen, featuring many of the same people. It reminds me of a book I read recently called Merchants of Doubt, how a handful of scientists obscured the truth on issues from tobacco smoke to global warming, written by Naomi Oriskers and Eric M. Conway, if you want a good piece of reading on the anti-science movements that are behind things like anything from DDT to cigarettes to climate change to acid rain, you name it. This book chronicles the abuses of science and the deliberate attempts by corporate interests and their friends, the lobbyists and politicians in Washington, to just deny and delay and deflect from plain reality against your own personal benefit.
On that note, thanks for joining us today on Swing State. If you've got comments, questions, or hate mail, you can contact us at @swingstate_show on Twitter, facebook.com/swingstateshow. Our website is swingstateshow.wordpress.com, and email is swingstateshow@gmail.com. As always, organize, mobilize, protest, vote.